Ready.
Alright, so our names are Pauline Spillman and Connor Spearing, and we're interviewing you for the IUP COVID-19 Oral History Project. We're interested in learning about people's experiences during the pandemic. Today's date is March 10th of 2023. So would you please begin by introducing yourself and spelling your name for us?
So good afternoon. My name is Khatmeh, Osseiran-Hanna, and the spelling of my name is Khatmeh, and then Osseiran-Hanna.
Thank you. So for the purpose of the interview, would you be willing to share your full name, your age, where you were living, and how did your personal and or professional priorities and projects that you were working on change when the pandemic hit?
Sure, yeah. So living in Indiana, Pennsylvania, as the Vice President for University Advancement here at IUP, and a lot changed in March of 2020. I guess that was the date, huh? We were sitting actually in this room, and a lot of the thing, we went remote from the university and we started working off campus, but some of the projects that went immediately in terms of urgency, because the Division of University Advancement does work with alumni and focuses on students in terms of scholarships. But because of COVID, we knew with the pandemic coming upon us that there will be a lot of emergency situations as people go remote. So we began the Emergency Response Fund that got started right away. And by April of 2020, we were collecting funds for that emergency response fund. And alumni and friends stepped up to that. And we also kicked off a care page that had alumni and students putting so much into it in terms of things that they can do at home during remote, because everybody was beginning to be isolated, and that really helped with not only the alumni who were working at home and the students who were being at home, but also our alumni base and the faculty and the staff who were working at home, from exercise, from Zoom meetings that were just back to back to back to back, not a moment to breathe kind of thing. Just it was such an alternative reality for most of us in terms of how to work from home rather than being face to face, because you started becoming distance. And I do believe strongly that mental health issues just kind of mushroomed during that period. So that really did change the variety of ways and projects that we were focusing on. So that the Emergency Response Fund was a major project, but the other major issues that in me personally, in terms of what I do at IUP, got pivoted, and we use the word pivot a lot. I think that was a new word during COVID. Was we started focusing on collaboration with external stakeholders even more, including IRMC, our partner across the street, and that COVID testing, and I'm sure you've talked to others about this. So I started spearheading that initiative in terms of the PCR testing. Now, I'm not the biologist, obviously, and that's Dr. Barathon, but it takes a lot of effort in terms of the nuts and bolts of getting things like that off the ground. And so my division was responsible. I was responsible in leading that effort in terms of the collaboration and getting the the public relations aspects of that organized. So I was the spokesperson, not spokesperson, I should be more clear about that. So any COVID-related items, any COVID-related arrangements, agreements that needed to come to IUP from external stakeholders had to come to me. So I was the appointed person from the president for that externally. So any collections of equipment, of masks, anything like that that needed to be distributed, that would be was organized by my office to be. For instance, we went to Punxsutawney Hospital, we arranged for distribution in other places. We worked with the steam shop at that time to get masks printed through the 3D printers, and we worked with, I think, I'm trying to remember what they were called, but with an alumni group that did more 3D printers from Homer City. We loaned them the 3D printer from Makerspace, what's now Makerspace, but the steam shop, and they printed even more, and it even went as far as New York City, because we have one of our distinguished alum, Courtney Voss, who's a chief nursing officer at one of the hospitals in New York City, and that was a major pandemic location in New York City. So all of that shifted a lot of the strategic initiatives, if you will, for the Division for University Advancement. Yeah.
So what were your responsibilities at the university like before the pandemic started? Like, what did your average day look like here?
Well, we're always busy, so I won't downplay that part. But I mean, we normally, we take care of alumni. Like when you graduate, for instance, you'll be hearing a lot more from us in terms of engaging alumni and doing work with what I call ambassadors, regional ambassadors. But we also take care of student ambassadors on campus that do work, so we connect the alumni with students, but we also do fundraising for initiatives on campus, like the NSM building, that's hopefully going to open in the fall. Well, it'll open in the fall, but the students will come in January. So it's more focused on long-term planning, not immediate. I mean, we do have an annual giving fund that does more immediate kind of things, but it's a lot of long-term future strategic planning. So I think COVID forced immediate strategic work that had to happen. That's the difference, and you really had to turn on the dime and respond right away and move things. And in academia, that's not very easy to do.
So what would you like us to know first about your experience during the pandemic?
Well, I think, I don't think COVID is gone, first of all. I do think that the pandemic, I'm not going to say it's an endemic, so it is, in a sense, it's something that we have to live with, COVID, in the way it has changed. I think the urgency of what we were dealing with at first is gone. So maybe that's what's over. But I do think that we need to be very careful about how we build the structure and be more systematic in how we move forward in terms of dealing with emergencies. I don't know if we've learned those lessons. And I do think that mental health should have and should always be at our foundation of how we do things. I think one of the things that the pandemic did, and I think we were preparing to be like this anyway because of technology and social media, that we were becoming more isolated and more isolated. And that, to me, the pandemic just added to that. So that isolation, I think, made mental health even worse. And I do believe that higher education has to somehow figure out what to do about that. And I don't have all the answers. But I think as university advancement professionals and in terms of strategic future thinking, we really need to figure that out. In terms of, I don't know, you two are very young, but how much time do you spend on your phones and in your rooms in front of a screen instead of with friends? I know from my kids. So, it's disturbing, and I think that just really, we just don't know each other anymore. And we need to do something about that.
So are there any artifacts about your experience during COVID-19 that you'd like to talk about? This could include things like clothing, documents, a favorite mask of yours, other objects, photographs, or anything that's like a tangible kind of memorabilia.
This is probably my face that says it, huh? I'm not sure. I mean, I don't have a favorite mask. I really didn't like mask wearing. I wore masks, and I was a total believer in masks, and I'll wear them again, but they bothered me. So it's not something, that I would want to, leave as an artifact necessarily. Obviously the N95 masks are probably better, and they made me, I was able to breathe better in them. Artifacts, I think it probably the better, the collaboration between the two organizations, IUP and IRMC, some of the good work we did together that brought us together. I could share some of those documents, we were able, out of that collaborative in terms of what the PCR testing did, and I know we have relationships with IRMC that date back a long time, but that PCR testing and that collaboration led to so much more, that we had a very successful IRMC day at IUP, and then we followed up with an IUP day at IRMC, and there's a lot of publicity on that I can share some of that. And then we started a rural podcast on National Rural Health Day on November 17th. And so those podcasts should be part of this, because that really is an outcome of, in a sense, the pandemic, because it kind of brought us all together even closer, doing even more things. So the podcast is a monthly podcast that happens, featuring IUP experts and IRMC experts once a month, and that's going to continue in the second season, and Com Media is involved in it. So it's a very integrated approach to doing that, and there will be a third season. So it's a very exciting initiative, and more to come. And I think as we go forward, I'm not, the collaborative and the pandemic, it will not take credit for this, because it happened, the idea prior to the pandemic is the thought process for the School of Osteopathic Medicine. And the pandemic only reinforced the need for a School of Osteopathic Medicine in rural Pennsylvania, and particularly in Western Pennsylvania. So while that idea was conceived by the president and the CEO of IRMC prior to the pandemic, it really has taken a much more, root in the collaborative as we grew, and now is becoming more of a reality, which I'm working on with colleagues to spearhead and really explore and hopefully implement and execute. And that's going to benefit IUP and really all of Pennsylvania and beyond on many, many folds. So I don't know if I answered that question.
You did. So if you are interested in donating any objects or allowing us to photograph any of these objects as part of the project, just let us know.
Okay, I can email you stuff. I mean, I don't know when your deadline is, but...
Well, these would just be going to Dr. Wick for
okay,
these.
all
So
right. Yeah,
if you would
okay.
like to email them to him or email us to relay to him, we can do that.
Yeah.
Okay. So in what you kind of already talked about this, but if you want to elaborate further on ways that the pandemic impacted your work here at IUP.
No, I think I've already kind of alluded to that, but I think it's also the remote work. I mean, I can even talk more about that. And I've been very firm with my division. The remote work is not, while we're not student facing, I mean, we don't teach, but we have student workers, etc. So a lot of people think, oh, well, you don't need to be here, you can be remote. I felt very strong that you need to be on campus, in the buildings, with students, with alumni, with the external stakeholders. So the pandemic really did have an impact on the work and on the participation of alumni in terms of engagement and the external stakeholders. We raised more money than ever, but it was in the bigger gifts, not in the smaller gifts. So that has a lot of, in terms of building a foundation of giving, I mean, like this kind of foundation, you can see that on the video, right? That does not bode for a really good trajectory if you don't build a wide foundation. So those $5 gifts, those $10 gifts, those $20 gifts are just as important as the $100,000 gifts. So because that builds, and then student participation and giving and engagement really went down for us because we work with students in that way as well. We don't necessarily teach, but we have a student engagement program and a student philanthropy program. So that's further to the other impacts. Yeah.
So you've already talked about how a lot of change happened to the priority and the projects that you were doing, new projects coming about. How have these things changed now that we've kind of returned to our more normal activities?
I mean, we're gaining back the engagement of students and alumni and everything that we're doing. So our numbers are up in terms of increased engagement and increased giving, and the dollars are pretty much stable. I mean, I'd like to see them increase always. The projects have not gone away because the need is there. I mean, the impact of the pandemic on the economy is going to be felt for a few years to come. It doesn't go away in a year or 2 years. It's going to be 5 to 10 years, and we're seeing the ripples. And that's, nationwide and globally. So we're only a microcosm of all that's happening. And here in Pennsylvania at IUP, we're seeing the ripples way down. And so we will continue, like the Emergency Response Fund is now the Student Assistance Fund, and we continue to raise money for it because there are many students who have urgent needs that benefit from that Student Assistance Fund. That's just an example.
So how did the lockdown impact your balance kind of between your work and your personal life?
um, Probably at my level, not much, because I probably worked more than before, and continue to work, because it was just continuous and there was a lot of urgent needs that had to be attended. But I think at my level, we're just always, it feels like we always work. I always say advancement in particular is a lifestyle. You don't really have a 9-to-5 job or an 8 to 4:30 job. It's constant. So anybody in this division has to always think that way as well, and work that way. So it just felt more isolated, if you will. I would tell the president often, I can't do this anymore because I gotta see people. Because I'm a social animal and I thrive on the energy of other people. So if you lock me up, I'm gonna die. So I almost felt like I was not breathing, and I think that's where that mental health, issues would come up. At least, I would come here at least once a week. I just needed to get out. The custodian was here, so Vicki and I got to know each other better. So that was a real nice, out. I do want to mention that some of the projects also morphed. Like we have a project that we've done in wastewater that started with COVID, testing COVID with wastewater. We did that with the borough, and now that has expanded. So it's being done not only with the borough, it's being done with Punxsutawney Hospital. We're going to be doing it in Johnstown as well. So testing COVID in all of these areas, but we're now going to be trying to also test for opiates in sewage water, and also for antibiotics. So there's so much more that, I'm not going to say the pandemic did that, but in a sense, it just brought more collaboration with external stakeholders, going back to that, in the beginning when I said, I started doing a lot of that, so that expanded all of that.
So have things changed or reverted now that we've returned to a more normal activities, and if they have, in what ways?
The reversion, again, we did have loss of staff because a lot of staff just, the great resign did happen at IUP too. So several people wanted to work remote and stay remote when we supposedly came back. So they found jobs online and they stayed home. So that impacted, bringing in new people, and with the budget, etc. There was always, you have to redefine, etc., restructure. So all of that takes time. So going back, now we're starting to, we got back most of the positions, and one area in my division is like, now we're breathing. Because the number of projects, the number of things that they were doing didn't get cut. It kind of, like I said, we'll just kind of be doing less, but we won't do, we won't cut reunions. We'll just cut the number of them, or we won't serve them like we used to. But still, you're forced by the external stakeholders. You can't keep saying no, because the momentum has been building, and external stakeholders are pretty demanding when they're your alumni, and you just have to keep going, and you do your best to accommodate. But now we're fully staffed in one area, and they're feeling a little bit more like they can breathe, and they can accommodate.
So what work changes or impacts resulting from the pandemic have you most enjoyed or dislike?
Well, again, that isolation was, and the masks were probably the most, disliked. I mean, like, I'm a social animal. What have I enjoyed is that, I think it forced collaboration, which became more organic, and hopefully it will continue to be more organic, and we can push for it more and more. Because I believe if we can continue on doing more integrated collaboration, that's going to be our white horse, or whatever you want to use as our savior, for a much better IUP of the future.
So you've talked a bit about this as well. How do you think the pandemic has impacted IUP and IUP's relationship with the community?
Well, I do think, again, it's that isolation and the fact that so many other extenuating circumstances happened at the same time, like the retrenchment, like the budget cuts, all of those things happened at the same time. Everything happened. It's like, it's hard, that and the decline in enrollment. A lot of people think like somehow we caused it. It's not demographics, it's all of those things. So I think those have not boded well. But I think on the other hand, all the positive things are and need to be publicized more, and more extensive work in terms of that collaboration that I'm talking about need to happen more and more. And that's where my area is working more and more, and needs to be doing more and more.
So, and again, this is something you've kind of already covered. Now that life has somewhat returned back to normal, how have your priorities, projects, and job responsibilities evolved? So if there's anything more that you'd like to elaborate on these projects that you're doing, or
strategic partnerships are really, really important, and it's not something because of the pandemic. I mean, that is something that we've been wanting to really boost and reinforce and strengthen for the last 3-4 years. We just, are doing it more and more, and the pandemic just provided more opportunities for that because people wanted it as well. And we're looking, IUP is continuously, like now we have inroads in Johnstown, we have inroads in Altoona, so we're expanding our footprint in terms of those strategic partnerships, Allegheny Conference, Armstrong County, so, and we're getting those because they're looking at us as a partner, as a major partner.
So how has the pandemic affected your life? Not looking at work, but maybe like your life at home or anything like that.
Again, it's like I didn't visit my uncle for almost 2 years. We didn't go to Washington, D.C., that my relatives are in D.C., and we didn't visit them. He's older, his wife is older, partly because we didn't want to risk, having older relatives be exposed if we were, and partly because we didn't want to get exposed, so we didn't socialize, go to activities, and so those are things that impact, again, that social aspect of our life was just me and my husband, and my kids, one is in Hawaii and one is in Montreal, so, and the oldest was living with us during the pandemic, and she was working for S&T Bank at the time, and I know, and she was working remote, and she went to McGill University and graduated and came here, and started working for First Commonwealth and then for S&T Bank, if it hadn't been for the pandemic, not that Indiana is Montreal, I know that, and we came from New York City, so again, not Indiana is New York City, but if it hadn't been for remote, I bet she would have stayed. It was just too hard being remote. So that was a really big impact. I mean, she just decided, I'm going back to Montreal, I don't like this job, I'm going to do a second degree. Okay, do a second degree. This time I'm not paying for it, although I paid for it.
So when, if ever, did the pandemic first feel real to you?
Well, it's interesting. It was right around this time. The president and I were in Florida, and we got on the plane to come back here, and we were reading about it. It was the beginning of March. It was earlier in March, like March 2nd or 3rd, and we were reading about it, about somebody, whatever, happening, and we landed at the airport, and then the emergency meeting started, so that's when it started feeling real.
So what facet of life was most impacted by the pandemic, and why do you think that is? Or what way do you think it was?
I think every facet of life was impacted, honestly. I mean, everything closed. I mean, my gosh. You had people hoarding toilet paper. I mean, my God, I don't know, I come from Lebanon, the country, and it was just fascinating for me to watch this whole thing unfold. Because, I mean, I didn't grow up in war, but, my husband did, and when you have airplanes flying over you, bombarding you, and people fighting, etc., and going underground, that's emergency, right? And pandemic happens and people start hoarding toilet paper, it doesn't make sense. So I think there was a lot of overreaction, but so that it really impacted and scared a lot of people unnecessarily, I think, in the beginning. And that took a lot of time to kind of wind down from that. So I don't know how you go back and that's the kind of stuff that I think in the future we need to be a little bit more thoughtful about. And I'm not clear how you do that because everything got politicized too. And so much partisanship. And they're still fighting about it, actually.
So how did the pandemic affect your perspective on things? Things like attitudes about community, employment, economics, society in general, or politics?
It was amazing, again, like watching it. The partisan, I mean, to me, it's just to be safe is best, and to help each other. That's why my thought process was to create the emergency response fund. I mean, right away I went to how do we help each other. The care page, this is where we need to be at, not at, this is all hocus pocus or whatever. I mean, it needs to be on the positivity of going to that next level.
So what impact did COVID or did the pandemic have on your personal and or professional relationships?
Well, I think in my position, I have to be very careful. I mean, some of the things I'm saying here are not necessarily, I mean, I know you'll share some of this publicly, but are not, I mean, people know where I stand, but I was not anti-mask, I was not pro-mask, so I was not publicly an anti-vaxxer or a pro-vaxxer, none of that. I mean, I just, I did what I needed to do for me and for my family, and of course, with friends. And whoever said they didn't believe, that's fine, that's their prerogative.
In what ways do you think your experience relating to the pandemic has been similar or different to other people's experiences?
I think probably, in I don't know. I mean, who am I going to compare it to? I think some people, I mean, I heard stories like people will come to work, will say, I'm not going to come to work because I'm afraid, that we're not going to, I don't want to be exposed, but then they'll go ice skating or shopping, etc. So I wasn't one of those people, right? I mean, that's the kind of stuff, I mean, that I don't relate to those folks. But, and, people took advantage of all of that in employment and being remote, using other, but I think people like me, there's a lot like me, who are conscientious, dedicated, and ethical. And at IUP as well. Yeah.
So, what are some of the things that you felt that you missed out on because of the pandemic?
I'm saying socialization, visiting my relatives and friends, even taking a trip to, really, literally, it took 2 years. We missed the Thanksgiving with them, Christmas, so it took 2 years before we did that.
What go ahead.
Sorry,
go ahead.
We didn't, even here in the division, we travel a lot for our business here. We didn't travel because of COVID. A lot of people were hesitant to come to anything, so we did events virtually, like the Celebration of Philanthropy. I don't know if you've heard about it, or the Distinguished Alumni Gala, where we honor alumni of distinction. It's the highest award that the university gives to alumni. Usually about 150 people come to that. And the Celebration of Philanthropy will have about 200 to 300 people, where we celebrate donors who give $5,000 or more and introduce them to the students who receive their scholarships. And we did all of that virtually, totally virtually. And that was like with not Zoom. We did it with a special software where they would sit at a table in a virtual environment. So they had table assignments with their students, and they got to talk to them. So we really did things differently. When you asked earlier about how we did things differently, so all of those things, and we didn't travel at all. So all of that was impacted. So things are back to normal now. But go ahead, I'm sorry.
Well, do you want to talk a little bit more about these virtual events that you had to do? How were they different than doing it in person? You've already said about how the social aspect is kind of taken away, and these just being virtual, there's so many different things. But
well, technology didn't always work, and it was really hard. So Celebration of Philanthropy, for instance, was on Friday night, DA was on Saturday night, and quite a few of the older folks didn't figure out how to get in, even though we had troubleshooters to help them, etc. So that was difficult. But the people who did get in and were able to table hop, you could table hop on this virtual network, really enjoyed it. But it's not the same. It's just not the same to be in the same room. So we were a lot better the second night doing it with a distinguished alum. We didn't have this technology problems. But we really searched high and wide to get this. My staff, was directed, you gotta find this software because I know it was out there. And they were like, well, we can do it via Zoom. I'm like, no, you can't do it via Zoom. You gotta get this software. I know it can be done. So it's challenging, and it was, it wasn't expensive, but it wasn't real cheap either. So, but we needed to make sure that our donors didn't miss that experience, and we weren't gonna feed them, but we did send them a voucher to get something to drink or eat, so that they felt like they had a box, in front of them they could open and have some snacks and a little champagne bottle, at least for the distinguished alumni, because Celebration of Philanthropy, we don't serve alcohol because students are there. So we tried to be very creative virtually, and then we had other events virtually via Zoom, like the awards for the volunteer appreciation. We did that via Zoom. It worked. It did the job, but it's a lot better when it's in person. And that last year we went back to in person, and it felt much better, much better. And we had a good turnout. People came, appreciated it, and we're doing it again. We're back to normal. So, yeah.
What aspects of pandemic life, and now during a somewhat post-pandemic period, have you enjoyed or disliked?
Well, because I'm not in the classroom, obviously, I do hear from our students that, and this is just from the students that we interact with, not all of them, but some of them, that are quite a few classes become online or they're recorded, and they don't like that. So that's things were not like that before the pandemic, and that was something that they did not like during the pandemic either. So I think that has impacted quite a bit of students in terms of performance as well. So I think that is wearing on all of us in terms of how to retain students and make sure that we're giving the best student experience here at IUP. And I worry about the future of alumni and how they're going to be engaged with us if this stays that way. Because the more you're engaged here, the more you'll be engaged when you graduate. So those are the things. My favorite parts, I love being with people like you, and I love bringing alumni to be with you and meeting, like 2 days ago we had a golf dedication, and the students were the best part, So it's really, in the end, that's why we're all here. So, yeah.
How did the pandemic impact the way that you enjoy or engage with the world? I know you said that you keep kind of hitting home that the social aspect is really important, but is there anything else that you felt?
Well, I enjoy the world much more now. I just want to get out and go and do things, and it's I think we take more vacations now than we did ever. Because normally, my husband and I will go for a 2-week vacation. But now it's okay, we got a week here, we can take a week there. We just enjoy it much more. I think, life is too short, and I try to remember that all the time. I pinch myself. I don't do a good job every time. Try.
So, again, this is something that you've talked about a little bit. In your opinion, how has IUP or the Indiana community as a whole changed because of the pandemic?
Well, I think on one level, I think we've become a little bit more isolated because some of us still want to work remote and do. I think we need to be better at bringing all of us back. And I know I'm challenged by that because they tell me I'm not embracing the future and I gotta get, but I don't know. I don't know if it's, I didn't tell you my age, did I? So I'm 62, so it's like, I don't know, is it my age or is it just I'm stubborn or opinionated? I have no idea, but I know like my oldest will not get on the phone or go see somebody at the university to change things. And I don't get that. So, and even my staff, I tell them, you gotta call. You can't email and write letters. That just doesn't work. You've gotta call, you gotta get face to face. So and that's what I started with, talking. If we lose that, I don't know what society will be like. I know. Are you both history majors?
Yeah.
It's different, I think. I mean, I know history, things always come back, and I believe in that, but I don't think we've gone through an isolation like this in history where you still can communicate.
Yeah. How did the pandemic affect the activities that you like to do prior to the pandemic lockdown?
Well, the socialization aspect, being with friends, going out, eating. Could say dancing, but no place to dance here in Indiana, is there?
Don't know.
I'm kidding. Yeah.
So would you like to share any memories or a specific memory about the pandemic that really is significant to you? Something that sticks out the most in your mind?
Positive or negative?
If you want to do one or the other, or you want to share both, it's up to you.
Well, I think, the positive one is really, the experience about the impact of the PCR testing really on the community and how the community appreciated that so much, in Indiana. That was just incredible that IUP did that with IRMC. And I think also when we sent, and this is another really, I was surprised. I can't remember how many, but it wasn't even that much. It was maybe 300 masks that we sent to Punxsutawney Hospital. They were so thrilled. They just they put it in the paper. They were just the happiest. That was another one just really incredible. Grateful. When people are grateful for little things, just made me feel really good. Negative, it just always, sticks in my head because people were so on edge. Zoom, Zoom, Zoom. I called it, we're zooming from one meeting to another. Zoom, 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 Zoom. And such tension that a colleague just was yelling at me on the phone and hung up on me. And this is someone who's really oh my God, So that's how high tensions got when you're isolated. Yeah.
Did you develop any new ways to enjoy the world during the pandemic lockdown? This can include things like hobbies or anything, if you'd like to share.
Well, I don't know if they're new, but I started painting more. and I started knitting more. So I found time to do all that, but I also started binging, and that probably wasn't very good. And I'm still doing that, Netflix and other things, but Netflix in particular. Yeah, I think you probably heard that a lot. Yeah.
So, you've kind of answered this, but how have these new activities or forms of engagement persisted into the post-lockdown world?
All of the above, except for the painting has slowed down because my husband is like, how many more new canvases are we going to have? Where am I going to put them? So I've always loved painting because I haven't gotten into painting. I draw more. So he was fine with drawing because they were in, she's probably leaving. Yeah, just let me. Yeah. Yeah.
So you talk a lot about this social aspect, like connecting with people is very hard during the pandemic. How did you connect with other people during the peak of the pandemic? Like, in what ways?
Well, I mean, it's interesting. I did, Zoom with friends from high school. I mean, there were things like that happened. I mean, I'm in touch with them through Facebook and through texting and things like that. But we did Zoom. We set up a Zoom with wine and things like that. So that was nice. And then I also did that with my cousins, like who are far away in the world. So we set up a chat on WhatsApp, my cousins. So now and that keeps up now. So that was also done. And we actually, the division here, we did a happy hour once a month via Zoom. And that was also, a way to keep us socially, connected, because you have to keep the team together, the morale. Didn't work as much as I would have wanted it to. Especially when it got to the summer, everybody had obligations. They really wanted to be outside, and that's understood. And it wasn't like you had to be there, so whoever showed up, showed up. But with the friends and family, the Zooms set up were really nice. From time to time we would do that, so it's nice. Yeah.
Have these practices changed now that we're no longer in lockdown?
Yeah, with the high school friends, we don't, yeah. Yeah, and the cousins, I talk to them once in a while, but the chats continue, yeah, on WhatsApp, yeah.
So do you feel like relationships with friends or neighbors, colleagues, and other people, were they weaker, the same, or stronger than before the pandemic?
I think probably, if I was to rate them, here, weaker during the pandemic because there wasn't. After the pandemic, they're beginning to get back to normal. With my distant friends and cousins, they're probably stronger because we really made an attempt to stay in touch. But remember, I'm only here 5.5 years, so I don't have deep roots in this community. But I did. Certain friends here are she's an alum, not a colleague in here. She and I would do Zoom once in a while to just stay in touch. She was really the only one I did that with. But we did Zoom. We celebrated her birthday on Zoom, things like that. So, yeah.
What new skills or training did you learn because of the pandemic?
Zoom. Teams. I mean, Teams I did not know before. I don't know what else. But Zoom definitely.
So what, if anything, changed in how you interacted with people at IUP on the job or in the community? You've talked a little bit about how things have definitely impacted people here at IUP.
Well, I think, I mean, the remote stuff is for me the most challenging, honestly, for me personally, and how to navigate all of that. So that's been something that I'm continue to try to do and embrace whenever I can, because it's not only with my staff who want it, but it's also colleagues who are also on Zoom. And sometimes I like Zoom because it does bring people from across the country that I don't need to fly to. I'm not saying I don't like it all the time, and so on, but I don't want to replace face-to-face meetings with it if I can have face-to-face meetings. So that's where it's going to remain a little challenging for me. So, yeah.
What else would you like to share that we didn't talk about, or do you have any specific memory that you would like to share from the pandemic? Just kind of anything that comes to mind.
Oh, I think that probably covers it all. I mean, I think, you know, I think the response to the emergency response fund was incredible. I think that was during, you know, people were shy during the pandemic. Other sister institutions were like, what are you doing? We raised like $500,000 within, like that. That was pretty incredible.
If you'd like to talk more about the response fund, if you have anything else to add.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I mean, I think our alumni and just stepped up incredibly. I mean, right away we had a couple who said, here's $50,000. Another one, you know, matched it with another $50,000. And you know, it just shows how much people care when there's something urgent, and you know, we're all about access here, and if we don't provide that, and when the pandemic hit, you knew that there was going to be economic impact. So the kids who are going to be, I shouldn't say kids, so you can edit that out, the students are going to be impacted who have, you know, economic needs. And we had incredible stories from, you know, the person who couldn't pay their rent, whose parent was out of a job. I mean, there was so much out there. You know, that shutdown, whatever, and we needed to do it, so, yeah.
How would you relay the experience of the pandemic to future generations?
Oh. It's funny, you know, now that you sit back and you look, it's like, yeah, that was for real, huh? And how many people died, right? I think on some level we were very lucky here in Western Pennsylvania. I mean, compared to New York City, compared to so many other places that had such a higher death toll than here. I think we just, future generations just need to be better prepared. We need to prepare them better. Like again, I go back to that preparation, that, you know, take partisanship out of it, and don't politicize humanitarian needs. I mean, that's, in the end, that's what it came down to. When people are dying, that's what's most important, is to fix that. You know, put life first. I don't know if that makes sense.
You've kind of already shared this, but are there any experiences or mindsets that would help us navigate a future crisis? You talked about being more prepared and being more kind and caring and understanding. But
I mean, preparation means systemization. You know, so really systemizing and structuring how we are prepared and doing that now. And coordination of efforts. I mean, I think that's where a lot of problems, you know, like this hand didn't know what this hand is doing, and really believing in a central point. You know, I call it a project management, but it's a core running point, and that's what's missing. And this is future generations. I mean, the World Health Organization, I mean, we're talking globally, but they weren't running point. I mean, they were issuing advices. CDC, were they really running point? I don't know. So, I mean, there are a lot of questions on there. Was Fauci running point? I mean, I don't know. There was a lot of, I mean, if we were going to go to the high level, but here in Indiana, there wasn't one place that was running point either. So all of these things have to be really thought about. I would get calls from somebody in Pittsburgh who's coordinating with someone in Indiana, and this guy here at IRMC doesn't know this person in Pittsburgh who's coordinating with this person. So there was a lot of, you know, and then that person here is talking to Dr. Barathon here, and that person doesn't know. So a lot, you know, that's why the president finally said, Khatmeh, you take it on. But, I mean, there's only one thing I can do. Not one thing. I mean, there's only so much I can do, too. Yeah. So there needs to be, all of that should be set in place and not have turf. Oh, it's my turf, don't tread on it. I really don't care, I'm just doing my job here, trying to figure it all out. So, check your egos at the door, future generations, and think of the greater good of society, and people's lives are at stake. That would be my message.
how would you describe changes in the community since the pandemic? Either the IUP community, Indiana community at large.
Sorry, I'm just...
It's okay.
Oh gosh, life. Oh, great. No, this is a good news. We're putting in for an earmark that had to be in by 5 p.m. I didn't have to do it. They're just telling me it's in. Okay. Yep. Sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. So how would you describe changes in the community since the pandemic?
I mean, I think there's probably, again, I think there's more collaboration. I do think there's more collaboration and more communication. I mean, in order to get collaboration, you have to communicate more and better. So I think that's evident. Do we need more? Yes, we do need more. So, and those are the examples I'm giving you are like the COVID detection in sewage water and how that's evolving to also include opiates and other things, and how it went from the borough to IRMC to Punxsutawney and now Johnstown and Khatmeh Hospital. So those are expanding. The collaborative that went from PCR to even more closer collaboration with IRMC and so on. And now the medical school. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So, are there any questions that you wish we would have asked about your experience at IUP or in the Indiana community during the pandemic?
Well, it's interesting you didn't ask once if I contracted COVID or if I knew anybody who was exposed to COVID, or was that on purpose? I'm curious. I'm just...
I don't know. I was just given these questions, so I don't know why they didn't. I think it's more like a focus on what your experience was being COVID, just like with the community, and more looking at it like maybe a social aspect as opposed to like you were individual.
Yeah, it's interesting.
I mean, if you'd like to share those, you can.
Oh, maybe because it's, what is that called? HIPAA law or something. Yeah. Oh, okay. Maybe that's why. Yeah. Because that's interesting, because there are so many people who did have COVID and you know, they did, I mean, you don't have to be specific about it, right? You could say, were you exposed? Did you know people who had COVID? I'm just, you know, because I mean, there were quite a few people out with COVID. Mm-hmm. How was that treated? How did you, you know, interact with them? How did you treat them on the job, etc.? It doesn't have to be specific to a person.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then there's long-term COVID now.
Mm-hmm.
Some people suffer from, and it does impact the work and so on. Anyway, those are just my thoughts.
Okay. Well, thank you. And is there anything else that you'd like us to know?
No. I think that we covered a lot, and I'd like to know where you're from.
Yeah.
Where are you from?
We could do the end the recording for now.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. I